Hello everyone, my name is Shanken Chen. I'm also Dr. Chen. So this is Unit 5, Episode 4. As you already watched Unit 5, Episode 1, we talk about the classical guitar. And in the Episode 2, we show you the electric guitar. At the Episode 3, we talk about the electric bass or electric bass guitar. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about the lute, typically the plucked string instruments families. Okay, so lute, L-U-T-E, is a kind of broad category for the plucked string instruments. This word can be referred back to the Middle Ages until Renaissance and even to the Baroque period. And usually lute, L-U-T-E, these plucked string instruments has a curved neck. When you look at the pictures, you will see there is a very obviously curved neck on the instrument itself. And there is no standard for the lute instrument strings. So it could be varied, depends on what kind of lute you use or what kind of lute you play. There could be more than 30 strings, okay? And usually for the tuning of the lute, it could be a 5 set of the strings. A set means there are double strings on top of it, and the tuning will be a octave differently between the two strings. And also there is a single melody strings. It's called a chanterelle. Chanterelle for the melodies, that means when you play the instrument lute, it doesn't only for the chords or only for the company harmonic progression, but also it could play melody on the instrument itself. And a lot of people said, especially from the research, it says the lute is actually derived from the ancient Arabic instruments called oud, O-U-D, this kind of instruments. So if you look at the pictures for both lute and or oud, it could be the body side is very similar. And especially at the back of the body, you can see it's kind of like a rounded shape. So this is how usually a lute instrument would have. And since I already said lute is a big category, so for the different countries, plucked string instruments such as ancient like Asia's pipa, like Chinese pipa, or Japanese biwa, B-I-T-A, or even the guitar. Those instruments are all plucked string instruments. So it could also be called lute families instruments. Okay? And so, as we already talked about the lute, the earliest book which record the lute instruments was referred to about 1270s. In a book is called Cantigas de Santa Maria. In this book, there are a lot of different pictures showing that the people is already play the lute instruments, and even the old O-U-D, old instruments can be seen from the pictures, and it's a color book. So it really describes very details about the lute instruments, which was already very popular for people's play and even carried around. And also the other plucked string instruments could be the guitar, since we already introduced in the previous episode 1, 2, and 3. So maybe in this episode, I can talk a little bit about the harp. A lot of people already know the harp, this kind of plucked string instruments, but there are so many different harps could be seen. It could be back to the Egypt ancient time. If you look at the mural, like the pictures drawing on the wall in the ancient Egypt, you could very easily to see there's the people back to that time, they already played the harp as their instrument. So there are different harps you can see from the pictures. Typically, there is a called the lap harp, lap, L-A-P. That means you can hold the instruments from your lap, and then you can play it. it's very simple design. So usually there are like 16 strings on the lap harps. And there is also a slightly bigger than the lap harp. It's called a lever harp, which is the instrument has to be touched to the ground. So it's kind of like typical huge harp. And there is don't know any standard for the lever harp strings, but usually you will see it's like 38 strings. And there is also a regular size or orchestral harp you could see from the orchestra, a very typical huge harp with different pedals underneath of the instruments. It's called a pedal harp. So for the pedal harp, you could tune different key while you were playing the instrument itself. So there is already a lot of strings on top of the instruments, but also you can tune differently when you change to the different keys. Okay, and the other pluck string instruments would be pretty easily to be seen in those kind of like country music, especially for the bluegrass. So two instruments will be easily to be seen in the bluegrass band. So the one is called the mandolin, mandolin. So what is mandolin? Okay, if you look at the pictures, you will see the mandolin is a little bit like smaller size of the guitar, and the body shape is like rounded, and usually there are 4 strings or 8 strings, depends on which instruments you have for the mandolin. And for the 8 strings, it was actually the double of the 4. So that means 2 strings together as a pair. So 4 pair of strings, that means the 8 strings, okay? And very interesting is the mandolin is tuning the same as the violin's tuning. So that means violin has 4 strings, right? From the lowest string to the toppest string will be G, D, A, E. And so for the mandolin is exactly the tuning as the violin, G, D, A, E, okay? And because of the double string, so it will be sounded much louder and much brighter, okay? And so mandolin is a kind of small guitar, and it's very easy to be carried around. And you can typically see the mandolin in the bluegrass band or even country music style. So the pluck string instrument, and it could be like a blazing speed when you play the instrument. It could be like fast tempo. You can play it very fast with your fingering, okay? And usually the people will use a pick, P-I-C-K, or a plectrum to pick up the string, to play the strings instead of use your fingers, so you will get a much louder sound. So back to the Baroque period, like Antonio Vivaldi, he's not only composed a lot of violin concertos, but also he composed different instruments concerto. So the mandolins, there is also one mandolin concerto composed by Vivaldi. It's called the C major. And so a lot of people play this C major concerto for mandolin. It's very popular. So if you have chance, you can take a look at it. And the other instrument is called banjo, B-A-N-J-O, banjo. You might already heard this name before. It is like a rounded shape of the body, looks like a drum. Usually you will use a very similar types of the material, such as like a leather or maybe leather-like substance to make up the body of the banjo. And there's a kind of rounded shape of the body itself. It just looks like a drum. And there's a long neck, or maybe the long fingerboard, or for the pluck string instruments, we say like a fretboard. Since they are flats on top of the fingerboard, that's called a banjo. That has a very long neck. And when you play the banjo, it will sound like a twangy or maybe a little bit louder, just like when you play the percussions like. So it was attack, when you attack the strings, it was sounded like percussive, okay? So banjo is also has differently for the different strings. So typically banjo will have like 4, 5, 6, or 8 strings on the instruments itself. And for the 4 or 8 strings of banjos, is usually tuning the same as the mandolin, okay? And those two instruments, banjo and mandolin, are easily to be seen in the bluegrass band. So I really encourage you, if you have a chance, you can search bluegrass music or even some of Celtic music, like Ireland music. They have a small band. They also have the banjo or mandolin, those kinds of instruments, or even guitar, or even the smaller guitar like ukulele. Those kind of traditional pluck string instruments could be seen from those kind of bands. And the other instruments is rarely seen. The name of this instrument is called theorbo, Theorbo, theorbo. This theorbo is the largest pluck string instruments in the lute families. So as we already talked about, lute is a big category. Underneath lute instruments, the pluck string instruments, there are so many different pluck string instruments, okay? So theorbo, usually you will see is like back to the Baroque period of the music. So something very old music, it will be easy to see theorbo. Theorbo, a lot of people say it is a kind of cousin with the viola da gamba, okay? If you look at the picture of the theorbo, there are two special, like two necks, two fingerboards of the instruments. Usually you will see only one straight fingerboard for the instrument or for any kind of bow string instruments or pluck string instruments. But for theorbo, there are two necks. So that's one of theorbo's specialties. And for the theorbo, there are maybe, typically you will see like 20 strings on top of the instruments, or it could be like 16 strings. So 6 strings usually is for the top of the neck, like top of the fingerboard. The other 10 would be the low or maybe bass strings, which is the underneath of the fingerboard. So 6 strings of the theorbo would be the typical one. And why is very similar to the viola da gamba. If you dig in more or maybe research more about viola da gamba and theorbo, you will find out more answer or maybe more detailed things. But as I already researched, it's very similar because the way they project the sound is very similar. And also the design of the body itself is very similar to the viola da gamba. And a lot of people said maybe theorbo would be the first instrument before the viola da gamba. Because viola da gamba is a bow string instrument, you have to use the bow to play the strings. But if you take out the bow, only use your fingers to pluck the viola da gamba, it could sound very similar to the theorbo or very similar to the guitar, okay? So both viola da gamba and theorbo, they have some relations for each other. So it could be a cousins of the string family. And for both instruments, they all have different sizes. Like for theorbo, there is a bigger size theorbo or middle size or smaller size. And also for the viola da gamba, it's kind of the same way. They have just like violins family, violin smaller size, and for the viola da gamba, they have the treble size of viola da gamba or maybe bass size of the viola da gamba. So it could vary. So as we already go through the unit 5 to talk about the pluck string instruments, I hope you enjoy the time to watching it. And next time, if you move on to the unit 6, we are going to talk about more music about the Baroque music. and I hope you will continue to watching. And I would like to just say thank you for watching, and I will see you at the Unit 6. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.